808s are one of the most used sounds in beat making, yet they can easily ruin your beats without you even knowing it. I've reviewed thousands of my subscribers' beats, and producers often make the same mistakes over and over when using 808s. So if your 808s never sound as good as you want, use the 4 ideas that I'm going to show in today's video. This will help your 808s sound much better and prevent your 808s from turning your beat into doo-doo caca. Whoa! That 808 sure is good for riding, but is it good for beat making? That's a whole different question. Let's start by talking about the very first problem when using 808s. Now, one of the most common techniques that producers use to improve their 808s is to use distortion. But what they don't know is that some distortion actually makes your 808s worse. Let me show you how. First, let's quickly put a beat together. I'm gonna grab this 808 here and I'll slap one here and there. Next up, we'll use a couple of percussion loops. This is a great way to spice your beats up instead of using hi-hats. We'll throw in our rims and snares and more percussion next. Along with some weird musical instrumentation here. And now let's say that we send this beat to our friend Mingus and ask him what he thinks. He says, "Hey, you, quit being a loser. Don't you know that all the cool kids are distorting their 808s nowadays?" So you fall to peer pressure and you throw some distortion onto your 808. You think it sounds okay, but little do you know, you actually made your beat sound worse. And here's how. Take a look at the frequency distribution of our 808 before we distort it. It looks pretty normal. The 808 has a lot of presence in the low end with some real nice curves down there. But let's take a look at our 808 after we add our distortion. You'll notice a lot of that low end actually vanishes. We definitely do have an increase in the presence of the higher frequencies, and we can hear the 808 a lot more. But the point of an 808 is to provide bass in our beat, to actually fill up the low end frequencies, and this distortion is actually hurting our 808's ability to do the most important job an 808 is supposed to do. The low end here just becomes much more weak, which may create an imbalance in our beat, causing it to sound worse. The reason this happens is because distortion fundamentally changes the shape of your sound. For example, here is the shape of our original 808. And here's the shape of the same 808, but with distortion. You can see a pretty big difference. Now, why does this matter? How does changing the shape of an 808 change anything? As you may know, technically speaking, the most subby sound that you could possibly use is a sine wave. Here is the frequency readout of a sine wave. It's pretty much purely low end. Now let's take a look at the actual waveform of this sine wave. As you can see, it looks much closer to our original 808 compared to the distorted version. And so the more you distort your 808 and change its shape away from that smooth sine wave shape, most likely you'll start to lose your subbier low frequencies. Now, how do you fix this problem? How do you add distortion without hurting your 808's ability to actually provide bass in your beat? For one, you can use better distortion plugins for this job. For example, Decapitator is often my go-to for adding distortion without affecting the low end. A bit of an extreme example here, but as you can see, those lower frequencies are still present and we're able to add a lot more into the higher frequencies of this sound. But let's say you happen to have your own distortion tool and you find a distortion preset you really like, but unfortunately it ruins the low end of your 808. There is still a workaround that you can use to avoid this problem from happening. Here's how. Add a frequency splitter onto your 808. This kind of tool comes free with many beat-making softwares, but if you don't have one, I don't know, ask your grandma for one for your next birthday or something. I can't solve all your problems. Then separate the low end from the remaining frequencies. Send these two separate pieces of your 808 to two different mixer inserts. Now you'll have all your low end frequencies in one insert and all of your higher frequencies in another. This allows you to add your distortion onto just your higher frequencies without affecting your 808's ability to actually do its job and provide bass in your beat. So by doing this, you have far more control over your 808, how much color you want to add, all without sacrificing any low end. Speaking of adding some color, why not add some color to the like and subscribe button? Look at them all sad and gray. Help light them up by hitting them. What are you waiting for? Come on, man. Anyways, that's how you use distortion with a lot more accuracy so it doesn't ruin your beat. But there's yet another distortion issue that happens when producers use 808s, and it's actually the opposite problem. Sometimes your 808 may already come with a lot of distortion, and that distortion can be a problem depending on the beat that you're making. If our beat already has other sounds or layers that exist in the same frequency space as that distortion may end up adding too much presence into this particular frequency space. This will, once again, create an imbalance in our beat's overall frequency distribution and may make our beat sound worse. So in a situation like this, using a cleaner, undistorted 808 will be a better idea. But what if we find an 808 that just hits so hard and it has a perfect amount of sub, it's just the perfect 808 for what you need. The only problem is that we don't need all that distortion that the 808 comes with. What can we do about this? How can you undistort an 808? What you might try is to use an EQ and cut a lot of the higher frequencies where the distortion is present, but if we try this, we just create a different problem now. This can actually hurt your 808. Often we need those brighter frequencies for our 808 to seem like it's hitting hard. It's part of how we get that impact at the beginning of the 808. And if we take an EQ and make this type of cut, this 808 doesn't sound like it's hitting as hard now. Think about what you're doing to this poor 808. Now everyone knows this 808 can't hit hard. It'll probably start getting bullied at 808 school. So here's how we can help fix this problem. What you want to do is open the sound settings and go into the envelope area. Now you're probably used to using the volume envelopes to control the shape of your sounds, but we're going to do something different here. Instead, we're going to go into Mod X, or the modulation area. Now you might not have ever used this feature before, so let's go step by step to make this easy to understand and to save our 808. Now what this is going to help us do is add a filter onto our sound. Now you might be thinking, what's the point? Won't this pretty much do the exact same thing as our EQ? You think you're pretty smart, huh? Well, there is a difference. Instead of just adding a regular filter, we're also going to be controlling when the filter turns on. And by doing this, we can let our 808 hit hard. Then right after that initial hit, we'll turn our filter on. And this gets rid of those distorted frequencies in the body of our 808. Pretty smart, huh? To do this, start by turning the amount dial down. This controls how much filtering we're applying. To make this a bit easier to understand visually, let's imagine there's an 808 in this little window here. And that green line shows us how much of that filter is on and when it's on. So this is a pretty good start. The 808 hits hard at the very beginning when the filter is off at first, letting us hear that initial hit. Then as the 808 continues to play, the filter eventually turns on and we get rid of those distorted frequencies. We'll also need to turn the hold all the way up, that way the filter will stay on for the entirety of the actual 808. And from here we can get a bit more accurate and control the attack and delay. This helps us decide how much of that initial hit we want. Now once we have our dials turned to the amounts that we want, take a look at the frequency distribution of our 808. We get that initial hit that has a lot of color, which helps our 808 hit hard. Then as the 808 continues to play, it's only the subbier frequencies left over. This is perfect. This technique will let you add 808s into your beat that hit hard, but don't get in the way of your other sounds in your beat if they happen to fill the same frequency space as your 808's distortion. So those are the first two problems that you need to be on the lookout for. The next problem has less to do with the 808 itself and more with how you use it. So let me play two different drum patterns for you and you let me know which one of these you like better. Here is drum pattern number 1. Okay, and here is drum pattern number 2. Alright, if you have human ears and you're not some kind of furry who pretends to have cat ears, you probably noticed that the second pattern is kind of weird. The reason why it sounds weird is because I programmed these kicks in a very strange way. Look at how high some of these kicks are. And as you probably know, traditionally you want your kicks to be pretty monotone. You don't really use multiple pitches for your kicks. Now why does this matter when it comes to 808s? Well, let's think about what we talked about in tip number 2. When your 808 hits hard, what does that actually mean? Typically, this is referring to the initial part of your 808. You can even see this visually. The beginning part of our 808 looks different than the body. So let's break this 808 into two pieces and analyze each individually. Alright, so if we take a listen to the body of the 808 and take a look at its frequency readout, its presence is primarily in the sub-ear region, so the body of this 808 is what generates all that low end. But if we take a listen to the initial part of the 808, the part that actually hits hard, we can see its frequency presence is actually higher. And what you might have also noticed about this frequency area is that this is the exact same frequency space that kicks exist in. So that beginning part of your 808 that hits hard, it's basically just a kick. And that is exactly why you need to think about how you program your 808s. If you have a very straightforward 808 pattern that doesn't really move much, this won't create huge problems. But if you start making extremely melodic patterns that use your 808s with a lot of different pitches, think about that kick in the beginning of your 808 and what it's doing. It might sound just as weird as that strange kick pattern from before. This can lead to the low end of your beat sounding problematic. Depending on how high your 808 goes, you'll have this weird, loud, useless, piercing sound that just takes up space in your beat. That just sounded awful. So if you have a very melodic 808 pattern, it might be a good idea to separate your 808 from the kick so you don't have this problem. Go into the settings and adjust the start time to get rid of that initial thump, so all you're left with is the subby body. Then you can bring in a separate kick if you'd like, or just clone the exact same 808 and isolate just the kick if you really like it. Then using this sound, just program it like you would any other kick pattern and just stick to one pitch. We may even want to take this a step further and also use some sidechain compression on your 808, but we'll save that controversial topic for another day. By doing this, we avoid having a leered, piercing, unpleasant kick in our beat, and we have a much more stable kick that is playing at a constant pitch. Now there is one final idea that you need to keep in mind when you're using 808s, and that's whether or not the 808 itself is even the right fit for your beat. There are times when your beat needs an entirely different kind of bass, and using an 808 actually makes the beat worse. And this might be a problem that you're having because you don't know how to choose other types of basses for your beats. And that's why I recommend watching the video that's showing up right next to me. By taking what you've learned in this video along with the video showing up right next to me, you'll understand how to not only use 808s better, but how to master using other types of basses so your beats improve as a whole. That's right, you will become a master basser. So click the video. What are you waiting for? Come on, man.